It was a Saturday night, and I was standing in my father's living room with a paper plate balanced in one hand, listening to the low hum of small talk and clinking glasses. Someone had put a playlist on. Nothing special. The kind of music you forget the second it ends. I'd driven over after work, still wearing my blazer because I didn't have the energy to change. My hair smelled faintly like rain from the walk to the garage. The heat was up too high inside the house, that dry, overly warm kind that makes everyone's cheeks look flushed. My younger sister, Marissa, was holding court near the kitchen island. She had a wine glass in her hand, and that bright, easy laugh she could switch on whenever she wanted. People leaned toward her when she spoke. My father stayed close by, smiling, nodding, letting her fill the room. I stayed where I usually stayed, slightly off to the side, close enough to be included, far enough to not take up space. At some point, someone asked how work was going. It was casual, like asking about the weather. Marissa glanced at me and smiled. Then she said, loudly enough for the little circle to hear, "Oh, she's doing fine. You know, still the family failure, but at least she's consistent." The words sat there, plain and heavy. A few people laughed in that uncertain way people do when they're not sure if they're supposed to. My father didn't correct her. He just took a slow sip of his drink, like it wasn't worth interrupting. I looked down at my plate. I kept my face neutral. I didn't make it a moment. I didn't give her the satisfaction of anything sharp. And then something else happened. Small, but strange enough that I noticed. A man standing behind Marissa, someone I didn't recognize at first, gave a short, almost polite smile. Not at her, at me. He was dressed well, understated. No loud watch, no bright tie. He held himself like he didn't need to compete for attention. When Marissa finished her little line, he didn't laugh. He just nodded once, like he'd heard something interesting. Then he said calmly, "That's not the story I've heard." Marissa's smile tightened. "Excuse me?" The man didn't answer her right away. He took a slow sip of his drink, set the glass down, and looked at me again, steady, like he was waiting for me to decide what happened next. I didn't say anything. I just placed my fork down on the edge of the plate and let the silence do what it does. That was the first time all night I felt fully awake. A minute later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. One vibration, then another. I didn't check it right away. I kept my posture relaxed. I kept my breathing even. I watched my sister's eyes flick between the man and me, trying to regain control of the room. The air smelled like cinnamon candles and roasted meat. Someone in the hallway laughed too loudly. The whole house felt crowded, not just with people, but with old patterns. My father clapped the man on the shoulder. "Evan here works with one of our investors," he announced, like it was a fun detail. "He's been helping Marissa with a few things for the business." Marissa lifted her chin. "Yeah, he's basically a lifesaver." Evan didn't look at her when she said it. He kept his eyes on me, still calm, still unreadable. I finally took my phone out and glanced at the screen. A group text. My stepmother, Lorraine. The message was short. "After talking it through, your father and I think it's best you stop inserting yourself into the business. It confuses people. Please don't contact the distributor again." I read it once, then I read it again, slower, because I hadn't contacted any distributor, and I hadn't inserted myself into anything. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask what they meant. I didn't correct the lie. I just stood there, quiet, while the room kept moving around me like nothing had happened. And in my mind, without emotion, a simple thought formed, clear as a checklist. If they were willing to send that message tonight, then something had already been set in motion. Across the room, Evan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulled out a thin envelope, and held it at his side, still looking at me, as if he'd been waiting for the exact moment I'd read that text. He didn't raise the envelope. He didn't announce it. He just stood there with it, like a door left slightly open. I stared at it for one steady breath. Then I looked away. And I waited. I left the party early. No announcement. No explanation. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair, nodded once toward my father, and stepped out into the cold without anyone stopping me. The air outside was damp, the kind that clings to your skin. My breath came out slow and visible. I sat in my car for a moment before turning the key. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. Mostly, I felt organized. At home, I placed my keys in the dish by the door, poured a glass of water, and sat at the small desk near the window. The city was quiet at that hour. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. Somewhere below, a bus sighed to a stop. I finally checked my phone again. There was already a second message from Lorraine. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. We all know your role." I didn't reply to that one either. Instead, I opened my laptop. For most of my adult life, my family had a very specific understanding of me. I was technical, reliable, quiet, the one who could figure things out when something broke. They framed it as appreciation, but it always came with limits. I wasn't asked for opinions. I was asked for fixes. If a vendor invoice didn't make sense, it came to me. If a system lagged, they forwarded the login details. If a report needed cleaning up, they assumed I'd handle it without questions. And for a long time, I did. Not because I needed their approval. At least, that's what I told myself. It was easier to just smooth things over, keep things running, avoid friction. The family business, my father's distribution company, had been struggling quietly for years. Cash flow issues, missed targets, vendors paid late, then later. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Whenever things got tight, I'd get a call, not dramatic, not urgent sounding, just practical. "Hey, can you look at something for us?" That usually meant wiring money, restructuring a process, or building a workaround no one else wanted to learn. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was family. By midnight, I'd pulled up my banking history. Nothing dramatic, just dates and amounts. Transfers labeled short-term loan or bridge. Small numbers at first, then larger ones. I didn't add them up yet. I didn't need to. What mattered more was the pattern. Each transfer lined up neatly with a moment I remembered, an event, a delay, a minor emergency that only I was told about. Always after reassurance, always with the same tone. "We'll square it soon. You know we appreciate you. This helps everyone." I closed the banking tab and opened another window, the business systems. I hadn't logged in directly for months. No reason to. Everything was handled. Or so I was told. Still, my credentials worked. They always had. The dashboard loaded slowly, then settled. At first glance, everything looked normal. Orders processed, inventory moving, shipments logged. But then I noticed something subtle, a discrepancy in usage. The system was being accessed more frequently than it should have been. Not just during business hours, late nights, early mornings, repeated logins from locations that didn't match the office. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. This wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate. I pulled up the access logs and scrolled without rushing. I wasn't trying to catch anyone in a lie. I was just letting the data speak in its own time. A familiar name appeared again and again. My sister, not as a viewer, as an administrator. That was new. I checked the permission history. The change had been made months ago. Quietly. No notice sent to me. No conversation. I sat there for a long moment, hands folded, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hi," a man said. His voice was calm, familiar. "This is Evan. We met earlier tonight." "Yes," I said. "I remember." "I wasn't sure if calling was appropriate," he continued. "But I thought you might want to know something." I didn't interrupt him. "There are documents," he said carefully. that don't line up with the version of events being presented to you. I glanced back at my screen. Where? I asked. There was a brief pause. Not hesitation, consideration. Tomorrow, he said. In person would be better. I looked at the timestamp on the access log, then at the permissions page, then back to the city lights outside my window. Fine, I said. Send me the address. After the call ended, I closed the laptop without logging out. I stood up, rinsed my glass, and placed it upside down on the drying mat. The apartment felt very still, clean, ordered. Before going to bed, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages from my family. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. Then I turned off the light, and I waited. I met Evan the next afternoon in a quiet office park just outside the city. Neutral building, glass doors. No sign on the suite except a small number etched into the frame. Inside, it smelled faintly like coffee and printer toner. He stood when I walked in. Same calm presence as the night before. No rush to impress. He gestured to a chair across from a small conference table and waited until I sat before speaking. I want to be clear, he said. I'm not here to create conflict. I'm here because I don't like sloppy stories. I nodded once. Neither do I. He slid a thin folder across the table. No dramatic pause, just a simple movement, like passing a menu. Inside were printouts, clean, labeled, dated. At first glance, they looked like standard business summaries, distribution reports, licensing references, vendor correspondence. Then I noticed the headers. The software listed wasn't generic. It wasn't third-party. It wasn't something you picked off a shelf. It was mine, not under my name, not under anything I recognized. It had been relabeled, repackaged, presented as an internal tool developed in-house. I didn't react. I just turned the pages one by one. Evan watched quietly. They've been demonstrating this system to outside partners, he said, positioning it as proprietary. I stopped on a page that listed deployment locations. There were more companies using it than I'd been told, more revenue streams, more access points, none of them authorized. I leaned back in the chair. How long? I asked. Just under 2 years, he replied. That's as far back as the trail goes cleanly. I closed the folder. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the HVAC filled the space between sentences. I wasn't surprised. Not really. The signs had been there. The sudden confidence. The way my sister spoke about the business lately, like she'd cracked something no one else could. She hadn't cracked it. She'd unlocked it. Why tell me? I asked. Evan folded his hands. Because I was asked to verify ownership before recommending further expansion, and the ownership story didn't hold. I nodded again. Do they know you're here? I asked. No, he said, and I'd prefer to keep it that way, for now. That worked for me. Back in my car, I didn't turn the engine on right away. I sat with the folder on the passenger seat, my hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. This wasn't a confrontation yet. This was information. At home, I reopened my laptop and logged back into the system. Same credentials, same quiet access. I didn't change anything. I didn't shut anything down. I observed. I pulled usage reports, license calls, export histories. I mapped access points against timestamps. The pattern sharpened quickly once I knew what I was looking for. They hadn't just used my work. They'd built their story on it, and they'd done it assuming I'd never look closely. That assumption told me everything. I created a new folder on my desktop, named it plainly. No emotion in the title. Inside it, I saved copies of everything. Then I opened a second folder. This one was older, archived, something I hadn't touched in years. Inside was the original framework, the first build, time-stamped files from long before the business ever needed help. I checked the metadata, still intact. I smiled once, not with satisfaction, with clarity. Before shutting the laptop, I did one small thing. I removed one permission. Not a shutdown, not a disruption, just a quiet change that required future approval. Then I logged out. That evening, my phone buzzed. A message from my sister. "Hey, weird question. Did you touch the system today? Some things are asking for credentials again." I didn't answer. A few minutes later, another message followed. "Probably just a glitch. Let me know if you hear anything." I placed the phone face down on the table and stood up. I made tea. I washed the mug afterward. I straightened a stack of papers on the counter. There was no rush. They hadn't noticed the shift yet, but they would. And when they did, I wanted everything ready. I sat back down at the desk, opened a clean document, and wrote 3 lines at the top of the page. Step 1, confirm ownership. Step 2, document misuse. Step 3, decide where truth belongs. I saved the file. Then I closed the laptop. And I waited. The next few days were quiet on the surface. That's usually how it looks right before people realize the ground has shifted. I went to work. I answered emails. I kept my routine intact. Morning coffee, evening walk. Nothing outward changed. Internally, everything was being sorted. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't hint. I didn't correct their assumptions. Silence, in this situation, wasn't avoidance. It was structure. By midweek, the messages started coming more frequently. First, from my sister. "Hey, the system is slowing down. Any chance you updated something?" Then from my father. "Need you to take a look at the software. Investors are asking questions." I read them when they arrived. I didn't respond. Instead, I followed the steps I'd written. Step 1 was already complete. Step 2 took longer. I contacted a forensic accountant I trusted, not through family channels, not casually, formally. We met in her office, a narrow space filled with filing cabinets and framed certifications. She didn't ask for background. She just asked for access. I gave it to her. We worked quietly for hours. No commentary, just verification, cross-referencing, confirmation. When she finally leaned back in her chair, she didn't look surprised. "This isn't accidental," she said. "It's systematic." I nodded. "There are revenue streams here that don't appear in the main accounts," she continued. "Licensing income routed elsewhere, shell entities, personal benefit." I wrote nothing down. I didn't need to. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "A clean report," I said. "Timeline-based, verifiable, no language, just facts." She understood exactly what that meant. Step 3 required patience. The annual investor event was approaching. I hadn't planned around it originally, but timing matters when clarity is involved. I checked the sponsor list. My name wasn't there. My company's was. That wasn't a coincidence. I made one call to my operations lead. Brief, precise. "I need the full legal and technical team available that night," I said. No announcements, no warnings. There was a pause on the line. "Understood," he replied. At home that evening, I pulled an old storage box from the back of my closet. Inside were notebooks, drives, things I'd kept without revisiting. One small drive in particular caught my eye. It had been given to me years ago, back when I was still told I was too serious to understand business decisions. It contained archived source material, nothing polished, nothing presentable, just truth. I plugged it in and watched the files populate the screen. Original builds, logs, backups. I hadn't needed them before. I did now. That night, another message came in, this one from my father. "We need to talk. This silence isn't helpful." I read it once. Then I archived the conversation. On the day of the event, I arrived early. Not to be seen. To observe. The venue was polished, soft lighting, quiet confidence. People shook hands and spoke in measured tones. My sister moved through the room like she owned it. My father followed half a step behind her, smiling at the right moments. No one looked at me twice. That was fine. I took my seat near the back, placed my bag at my feet, and waited. When the presentation began, I listened carefully. Every word, every claim. There it was. A line about internal systems, a nod to proprietary efficiency. I made a small note in my head. When it was time, I stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just when the room had settled enough to notice. The moderator looked surprised. My father looked confused. I introduced myself by name. Then I said one sentence. I'd like to clarify ownership before we go any further. The room went still. I reached into my bag and placed a single document on the table at the front. The first one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I just waited for them to read. And when they did, everything started to move. No one spoke at first. The document lay flat on the table, unremarkable at a glance. Just a cover page, a title, my name printed neatly at the top, the kind of thing people underestimate. The moderator cleared his throat. I'm sorry, can you explain what this is? I can, I said, but you won't need me to. I stepped back slightly, giving them room to read. I wasn't there to persuade. I was there to establish reality. My sister leaned forward first. Her smile had disappeared. She skimmed too quickly at the start, then slowed when she realized what she was seeing. Her hand tightened around the edge of the table. My father picked it up next. He read more carefully. He always did when numbers were involved. I watched his jaw set as he reached the second page. This is inappropriate, he said finally, looking up. His voice was controlled but thin. This isn't the time or place. It's exactly the place, I replied. Calm, even. This is where representations are being made. One of the investors spoke up. Is this claiming ownership of the system being demonstrated? Yes, I said, and documenting its unauthorized use. Another silence followed, this one heavier. I nodded toward the screen behind the panel. May I? No one stopped me. I connected my drive. The display changed. Not flashy. No animations, just side-by-side files. Original build on the left, deployed version on the right, timestamps visible, file paths intact. I didn't narrate it. I let the room absorb the alignment on its own. My sister stood up. This is a misunderstanding, she said quickly. We were told the system was internal. By whom? Someone asked. She hesitated. Just long enough. My father stepped forward. We can resolve this privately. I shook my head once. Small movement. Deliberate. This isn't private, I said. It's documented. I nodded again, and my accountant, who had been seated quietly near the aisle, stood and distributed copies of a second report. Financial, clean, annotated, licensing income, alternate accounts, dates that matched the system access logs. The room changed then. Phones came out. People leaned back. Chairs shifted. No one looked at me anymore. They looked at the facts. A woman near the front asked, "Why wasn't this disclosed?" No one answered her. Security approached, not urgently, professionally. They positioned themselves near the stage without touching anyone. My father didn't argue. He just stared at the screen like it might rearrange itself if he waited long enough. My sister sat back down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't look at me. I unplugged the drive. "That's all," I said. "Thank you for your time." I stepped away from the table and walked toward the exit. No one followed. No one called my name. As I reached the door, I heard voices rise behind me. Questions, demands, confusion finally catching up. I didn't turn around. Outside, the air was cool and steady. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the evening lift in a way I hadn't expected. Not relief. Resolution. I took out my phone. There was a single missed call from my father. I didn't listen to the voicemail. I put the phone back in my pocket, and I went home. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded the way systems do when they're finally exposed to daylight, step by step, according to process. By the next morning, the investor group had issued a formal pause, not an emotional reaction, a procedural one. Reviews were initiated, external auditors were brought in, legal counsel replaced casual emails. I wasn't copied on most of it. I didn't need to be. My accountant sent me the finalized report 2 days later. It was exactly what I'd asked for. Timelines, amounts, clear separation between licensed, unlicensed, and misrepresented use. No adjectives, just structure. I forwarded it once, to an address I'd been given quietly at the event. Then I archived the thread. My father tried calling again that week, twice. Then he sent a message. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." I read it in the kitchen while water boiled for tea. I didn't respond immediately. I finished what I was doing. I poured the water. I waited for the steam to settle. Then I typed one sentence. All communication should go through counsel. I didn't add punctuation. After that, the messages stopped. The business didn't survive the review. That wasn't my decision. It was the inevitable result of records meeting scrutiny. Accounts were frozen. Partnerships dissolved. Employees were notified. Some of them reached out to me directly, not with anger, with confusion, with concern. I answered what I could. I pointed them to resources. I didn't promise anything I couldn't control. My sister never contacted me. I heard about her through other channels. Meetings canceled, travel plans changed, a quiet move out of the city. There was no apology. I hadn't expected one. What surprised me was how little space the whole thing took up in my days once it was over. No dramatic aftermath. No satisfaction spiral. Just quiet. One afternoon, I sat at my desk and deleted a folder I'd kept for years. The one labeled Family. Old documents, old drafts, old justifications. I didn't hesitate. The space it left behind felt usable. A week later, I walked past a storefront near my apartment that had been empty for months. Someone had finally cleaned the windows. A small sign was taped inside. Available. I paused longer than I needed to. Not because I wanted it. Because I noticed that I could want things again without checking who they might upset. That night, I reorganized my desk drawer, threw out pens that didn't work, sorted cables, put everything back in a way that made sense to me. Before bed, I checked my phone. No new messages. I set it face down on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and lay there in the dark, listening to the steady, ordinary sounds of the building settling. Nothing was chasing me anymore. Nothing needed fixing. And for the first time in a long while, that felt complete. A few months later, my life looked quieter in ways that mattered. Mornings were slower. I made coffee without checking my phone first. I walked the same route through the neighborhood and noticed small things I'd ignored before. The way one light always flickered before turning green. The sound of dishes being stacked in the cafe on the corner. One Saturday, I cleaned my apartment properly. Not the rushed kind, the deliberate kind. I wiped shelves I hadn't touched in years. I donated clothes that no longer fit who I was. I opened the windows and let fresh air move through rooms that had held too many old conversations in my head. There were no updates from my family, no surprise messages, no late-night calls. That silence held. Occasionally, someone would ask if I was okay about everything that happened. I'd answer honestly, I am. Because I was. Not because things had gone my way, but because they were finally aligned with reality. One evening, as I was organizing a box of old cables and drives, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar name, a short message. Hi, I was given your contact by someone who said you understand complicated family business situations. I don't need advice. I just need to know where to start. I read it once. Then I placed the phone down, finished tying the cable I was holding, and sat with the message for a moment. I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd learned the difference between urgency and readiness. Some situations don't need fixing. They need clarity. and clarity works best when it's calm. I replied later that night. Just a few sentences. Practical, grounded, no promises. After that, I closed my laptop, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window for a while, watching the city settle into itself. There was no dramatic feeling, no sense of victory, just order. If you're listening to this, and parts of it felt familiar, if you've ever been quietly cast into a role that didn't belong to you, I hope you take one thing from it. You don't have to prove who you are to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. Sometimes the strongest move isn't explaining, it's stepping back and letting truth stand on its own. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this community grow. And I'd love to hear from you. Comment below with the city you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read every single one. 2 more stories will be waiting for you next, both from people who found clarity in unexpected places. Until then, take care of your work, take care of your time,